So this morning I'd like to talk about the Trinity as the model, the image of God that emerges from the story of Holy Week. And I think we're at clearly a sort of a turning point in the history of the world with our global consciousness, with the amazing acceleration of communication that has taken place through the internet, through we could say, the universalizing of the idea of human rights, even though this is not always applied, but the idea is there in everyone's mind. And we live in a world that's being shaped, and human relationships are being shaped more and more by the technologies that we have created. Raymond Panica, sorry I didn't mention his name to you, but Raymond Panica was a great student of religion, a philosopher, thinker of the last century. And for him, we are at a turning point, as he says, in the adventure of reality. And reality, according to the American philosopher William James, is where we place our attention. So where we really focus our attention is reality for us. And perhaps this is why the contemplative consciousness is so important for us to understand and to teach and to protect today. Because without this capacity to pay attention, we very easily become distracted because of all the entertainment, all of the information, all of the activity, all of the travel, everything that we can do that is so wonderful can easily become a major destructive conglomerate of forces. And I was reading, many of you may have read also a book called Sapiens, which is one of these books that comes along about every 10 years, and it gives you, a very interesting overview of humanity, the history of humanity. So in this book, the author, his name escapes me at the moment, I can't pronounce it. He's Israeli, I know, I can't remember. Yasser, not Yasser Arafat, but anyway, something like that. So he gives us a very brilliant and erudite overview of the evolution of humanity. And it's had a remarkable success. But as I was reading it, I began to become a little disturbed by what it left out. And not only does he leave out the spiritual dimension, but he dismisses religion as if it was something just another function of developing a socio-economic society. And I think he describes religion as the way in which we can make stories, myths, fables, which unite the tribe, unite people. Well, it's an easy way of dismissing religion from the dawn of history in 2 sentences. But interestingly, he also, as far as I can see, completely misses and ignores the creation of art, of beauty, the Beethovens and the Shakespeares of humanity, and the Michelangelos. This doesn't have a place in the story of humanity, because it's not directly measurable or part of the socio-economic evolution. So when I noticed that, his erudition and his big vision began to seem very limited. And it led him, I would think, to a very pessimistic view of humanity at this turning point in our adventure of reality. Because without this dimension, humanity kind of loses interest in itself. We don't see our capacity for transcendence, for understanding the world in which we find ourselves. And in some ways, we could say, in the world which we make conscious by being human. Then I didn't read the second book in his work, which is called Homo Deus. But I think it's an extension of the conclusion of his first book, which is that now humanity, facing all its failures, all its dysfunctionality, is now capable, through science, of recreating itself. We can now remake humanity, not only in order to control genetic diseases and so on, but also, as he says, I think irresponsibly, to decide what we desire. So in other words, we completely think that we can remake our humanity. This is a growing idea in much of modern thought and science. And it's rather similar to the story of the Tower of Babel in the Bible, when humanity, at a very prosperous moment, the people of Babel had everything, and they decided then to go that one step further and reach heaven by building a great physical tower. And of course, the tower fell, and the people were confused by the many languages that God gave them. The story seems to imply that the multiplicity of languages is a punishment, and that's why we have our translations here. If it weren't for Babel, we wouldn't need Helen and Debbie. But there's another way of, certainly it's inconvenient that we have these different languages, but it's also a great enrichment, because every language is another way of looking at reality. And it's very difficult for us to to get into another language or into another culture, into another religious belief system. It's very difficult for us to see through the eyes of another, but it's a wonderful work to try to do, to dialogue, to step back from our own point of view so that we can truly see things differently. And I think we would all feel a certain sadness when we hear that, I forget what the number is, but every day a certain number of languages dies out in the human family. And each of these languages, they may not be as sophisticated as French or English, but each of them represents a unique expression of experience and understanding. So, this idea that now we can reinvent ourselves through technology is, I think, not only deeply depressing, that we as human beings are in such a sad state and so unhappy with ourselves and our relationship to the world that we've decided to kind of commit a sort of collective suicide and reinvent ourselves. It's not only, and you wonder what message this sends to children, to the next generation. Not only is it depressing and, I think, disrespectful to the real achievement of humanity, but it's also foolish, because it's not going to be possible. The Tower of Babel will collapse. So we are, as Panika said, at this turning point in the adventure of reality. And I think what can emerge from Holy Week for us, as we reflect on the story of Jesus in the last hours and minutes of his life, is an understanding of the human condition, what it means to be human. And it offers us this affirmation of humanity and of the potential of the human. And surprisingly, it does this by, even as it describes what we might think of as the worst that could happen to a human being. Rejection, suffering, and death. But even in the way we enter into the story of the Passion of Jesus, we understand the meaning of suffering, and we understand that death is part of this mystery of life. So, at this turning point in our human adventure, we are confronting, on the one hand, the forces of globalization. The world is becoming a village, we are told. But that's a claim that I think we would feel increasingly unhappy with. And certainly the other side of globalization, is a rejection and a reaction against those forces. that are uniting humanity, at least in its infrastructure, its technology, and its economy. The reaction against globalization certainly includes terrorism. When you look at the sources or the roots of terrorism, it comes very often from small or societies that have been crushed by geopolitics or by economic forces. We just have to look at the Middle East, which was, in a way, an invention of the last days of the British Empire, when they drew lines on a map without any respect for existing cultures or languages or traditions, and then walked away and left the people to live with this mess that they had created. So, in contrast to globalization, we have this assertion of local identity. And in all of our affluent societies, developed world, we have a strong reaction against economic and technological globalization, particularly in the way that this pollutes or threatens to destroy our environment. Here we are sitting in Bonnevaux, in this small piece of land which we discovered is remarkably pure and unpolluted. And the local Natur Vienne, the local environmental agency, are fascinated by the biodiversity of the land here at Bonnevaux, and we're even talking about it as a point to regenerate the environment in this region. So they're coming in, I think in the next couple of days, to look at the different varieties of orchids that are flourishing here. So here is Bonnevaux, a local community, rooted in a particular piece of earth, but also a center of a global community, global and local. And it's this connection between the real, physical, global community and the global communication and the global friendship that we can share through technology and travel. This seems to me to be one of the major forces of hope in this turning point that we find ourselves in today. And we've noticed this also in our own community and through the development of online meditation groups. These are very popular now, and they serve a very good purpose, particularly for people who are sort of isolated meditators physically, or people who can't get out for different reasons, of time or travel. This capacity to meditate together online is a blessing. But at the same time, I don't think it is a replacement or even of equal value to the experience of being together, in person, to meditate together. It's certainly valuable, but it's not the same. Having a Skype conversation with someone is wonderful if you want to communicate more directly and see the expression on their face as they talk, or you haven't seen them for a long time. But it's not the same as going to the trouble and the expense of making the trip to be with them in person. So one of the essential questions that we have to ask ourselves today, in this moment of our adventure, is what do we have in common and what is unique about us? And one of the things we have in common is that we are all unique. It's not a contradiction. The human condition is described in the Passion narrative, and in it, any human being could recognize a deep resonance with the experience that Jesus is undergoing. The wisdom of humanity is present in this story. Not only psychological, the biological things we have in common, but the wisdom, which is the ability to see connections, the ability to... This problem? Okay, let's hold it close. So not only in the Passion narrative do we see the questions of suffering, physical and psychological, but we also see the presence of a deep wisdom, a universal wisdom, which arises from a mystical consciousness, we might say, or the spiritual dimension that I've been speaking about. And this is not abstract, because when this mystical consciousness is awakened, we begin to live a contemplative life. We find that we can live life day to day in ordinary... What's the matter?
Sorry, the French people are not loud enough.
Not loud enough. Okay, maybe you hold it closer. Is that better? Ça va, Pascal? Okay. So what we see in the Passion narrative is an understanding of the human condition that we all have in common, but understood in the light of this spiritual dimension. And one of the things that emerges from it is an image of God, or an understanding of God. And it emerges in the sayings and the prayer of Jesus, especially evident in the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John is the story of his life and teaching and his death and resurrection, which on the one hand seems to remind us of the humanity of Jesus. We see him tired after a hard day's walking. We see him sad. We see him suffering. We see him grieving for a friend who has died. We see him thirsty. So we see many examples of his humanity. But also, in the same gospel, we have the highest kind of theology, or Christology, where Jesus, or the words of Jesus in the gospel, manifest his deepest identity as if you like, the divine nature that he enjoys, or that he lives with. Throughout the gospel, Jesus identifies himself with the Father. When the Dalai Lama commented on the Gospels in The Good Heart, Sister Eileen O'Hay asked him, if you could meet Jesus, what question would you like to ask him? And he replied immediately, what is the nature of the Father? And it took us all by surprise. First of all, that he had already formulated this question. And secondly, that it's a question that not many Christians have ever thought about. And so what is the nature of the Father? Jesus says that he has come from the Father. He is returning to the Father. That everything he says is a communication of the Father. He is sent by the Father. His works, what he does, is a manifestation of the Father. So forget about the male image here. What is the Father? Well, perhaps we could say the Father is the ground of being, the ultimate source, which we are aware of but cannot see, cannot identify, that has no boundaries. And yet, this fatherhood or parenthood of God in the language of Jesus is intimate, tender, loving, kind. Remember the story of the prodigal son. The father's loving, forgiving gentleness to the prodigal son. And so Jesus tells us in chapter 14, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word. We could have another long retreat on the meaning of that phrase, keep my word. And if anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we shall come to him and make our home with him. We will come to him and make our home with him. This image of the Father with Jesus coming into the human soul and creating a home there reminds us of the language of Julian of Norwich, one of the great English medieval mystics, who speaks about exactly about God being at home in us in a very domestic kind of way. And Jesus uses this image of home many times even in his most elevated teachings. So a little later he says to his disciples, "Make your home in me, as I make mine in you." Make your home in me. Be at home with me. Be at ease with me. Be relaxed with me. I mean, what does it mean to be at home or to make a home? It's to create, it's to make a place which is comfortable, which is welcoming, where you feel yourself. So Jesus is saying, be at home, make your home in me, and I will do the same in you. We will be at home together. And for Jesus, this homemaking of God in the human is the nature of the Father. And from this relationship of Jesus and the Father in us comes the gift of the Spirit. When the Advocate comes, whom I will send to you from the Father, the Spirit of truth, who issues or comes from the Father, he will be my witness, or she will be my witness. So we already can see the elements, the essential elements of the Christian image of God, which is the unique contribution of Christianity to the human search for God, this understanding of God as a Trinity, as a communion, or you could say as a home, with Father, Son, and Spirit. Again, forget about the gender identity of those words, Father and Son, but where Father, Son, and Spirit form a family, or form a home, a community, and that is the nature of God. So this arises directly from the experience of Jesus that he describes as his knowledge of the Father. He speaks from this experience, and as he speaks, he creates this new understanding. And we are the result of that, and we pass that on. And so, later in the Last Supper, Jesus gives this great prayer, offers this great prayer of unity to the Father. Holy Father, keep those you have given me true to your name. So, as his disciples, we already have a relationship to the Father. But we have only come to Jesus in whatever way we may have found him or understand him, but we only had this relationship with Jesus because of the will of the Father, because this has happened from this ground of being that we all live in. So it's a deep integral meaning of our life. Keep those you have given me true to your name, so that they may be one like us. So the consequences of this image of God are to be found in the way we live together. That the way human beings live should be should be in unity, in peace. Where there is unity, there is peace. Where there is peace, there is justice. So this image of God as Trinity, as revealed by Jesus, has a dramatic impact upon the way we see human life and human society. And then at the end of this great passage, as he prays for us, for humanity, and all humanity, he says, may they all be one. Father, may they all be one in us. So our unity is not a separate unity, it's a unity in the Father, in the unity of the Father and the Son. So here you have, we are included now in the Trinity. We are enfolded in the Trinity, in the life of God. As you are in me, and I am in you. So the way we are in unity is a direct reflection and a participation in the life of the Trinity, the Father and the Son, that is communicated and expressed and sustained by the Spirit. And this gives us a sense of what the word glory means. We hear this word, we'll hear it a lot over the next few days, la gloire, glory. And when we think of glory, we think of, I don't know, the Hollywood Oscar ceremonies, or coronation of the Queen or the Pope, or some worldly glory and celebrity and power. But clearly, the word glory has a different meaning here. The glory of God, according to Saint Irenaeus and Irene, is the human being who is fully alive. And Saint Irenaeus goes on, the life of the human being is the vision of God. So the glory of God is the human being fully alive, but the life of the human being is the vision of God. So we'll come back to this idea of the Trinity this afternoon, and to look at some of the ways in which it has been part of the human understanding and search for God from the very beginning. We find this concept, or this seed of the Trinity in all the major streams of wisdom in humanity. But what we can see, I think, is that the passion and the death of Jesus show us something. They manifest something in an unexpected way. This is not a story of success and human flourishing and what we normally mean by happiness. This is the end of a good life of an innocent person in a terrible way. And every aspect of that end touches our hearts with grief and pity. So if the manifestation of God can be made in this dark and painful aspect of the human condition, this is something we should really listen to carefully. because it's revealing the whole meaning of life. Nothing is excluded from it. And it shows us not an abstract idea of God, a philosophical idea of God, but a rather shocking idea of God, certainly for our sister religions in the biblical tradition, the Jewish and the Islamic faiths. This idea of the Trinity is quite shocking, and it seems to be a betrayal almost of the revelation of the unity of God. So it's a controversial and challenging revelation. And for us too, I think for most Christians, our image of God is not Trinitarian. We think of God as, one great entity sitting alone at a great distance and judging us or observing us with a rather cold eye. And at the same time we're told that this is a loving God, but this single image of God is not a very loving image. We have to force ourselves to think of that kind of God as really loving. So I think for many Christians too, this revelation of God that comes through Jesus and in an intense way through the story of the end of his life, this is a challenge, but like all challenges, an opportunity for growth and new understanding. So let's end. I just lost it. Let's end with a little extract from the last great prayer of Jesus at the Last Supper. Listen, the time will come. In fact, it has come already, when you will be scattered, each of you going your own way, and you will leave me alone. And yet I am not alone, because the Father is with me. And I have told you all this so that you may find peace in me. In the world you will have trouble, but be brave, because I have conquered the world.